Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. We are getting towards the end of the year. Aaron, how are you, man? We got you and I have got this one and one more at least for the end of the year. How are you?
I'm good. Yeah, we are definitely getting down towards the end of the year. Work was crazy busy, starting to slow down a little bit, and kind of hopefully get to enjoy the holidays. Hopefully not everyone will be too sick. I feel like the last couple years, it's been like, what kind of Christmas sickness is coming through the house? But we'll weather the storm no matter what.
I know it's supposed to be the happiest time of the year, and everybody's either sick or they've got family that stays too long, or people stressed out over whatever it is. So yeah. But what we're going to do, we did last week, we got together and did a sort of state of cloud review for 2025. This week, we're going to do state of AI review. Hopefully, we can knock this out within an hour. We're going to see how long it goes, but that's the goal is try and knock this thing out within an hour. Lots to cover this year, man. Lots to cover. I started making a list. I started going back through the old stuff. And the list basically boiled down to like the year of OpenAI, the year of NVIDIA, the year of because every single, I think we could do an entire show on every single one of these ones that we have listed. We're going to try and hit the highlights. Why don't we start with, we'll flip a coin. Do we start with the year of NVIDIA or do we start with the year of OpenAI?
I think we got to start with OpenAI.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to kind of go through this. I'm not doing this purely from notes. I'm doing it kind of from memory. And I'll tell you what, man, as I was reviewing this stuff and thinking about doing these shows, it is unbelievable how much stuff got packed into a year. I mean, I feel like, internet time, we used to talk about internet time being like 1 year is like 7 years in people time. AI time feels like it's even faster.
Yes.
So,
and I'll add a data point to that. So I mean, for those that don't know out there, I've recently joined an AI startup and I am 7 weeks in. Yeah. And I feel like I've been there 7 months. Like,
right.
7 weeks in, almost no onboarding, 2 product launches, like hit the holidays, let's go. Like it is like, as somebody who's kind of not an OpenAI, don't get me wrong, but like at another decently sized AI startup, shit's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no other way to put it, man. Shit's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a year of AI. I mean, I feel like if I try and recap the sort of OpenAI piece of it, there were pieces of it that were technology. So I mean, they launched Sora and they launched newer versions of ChatGPT. They went through some versions that were and I'm not going to get all the versions because quite honestly, like they move so fast it almost doesn't matter. But like they launched new versions of ChatGPT. It was interesting to watch the kind of blowback from the marketplace in terms of there was always is this one better? And I feel like we've now reached a point where they're always incrementally better, but people, kind of the way people are with iPhones now, but not until iPhone was like 10 years into it, where it was like, yeah, it's incrementally better. It got a little better. I feel like models are a little bit like that, just as a whole in the industry. I don't think we know how to determine if they're really, really better. I think we tend to look for these like breakthroughs that like just regular humans, not the model testers are validating. But, they started the year, they kicked off some new stuff. It was very interesting to watch kind of the reaction of people being like, the personality of the model has changed because you've got so many people that are using these chatbots as a friend, as a therapist, as somebody who, is helping them kind of solve life problems. So it was interesting to watch that. It was interesting to watch them go through iterations of pricing. They went from, free tier to a $20 tier to a $200 tier. I think they're ultimately trying to figure out, how far can they push that, and then how do they I think they're sort of struggling between like, how far can we keep pushing people on like, increased pricing? Because there are incrementally smaller and smaller tiers of people who are like, I'd pay you $500 a month. I'd pay you $1,000 a month because maybe they're doing very significant stuff. the challenge
or
they're
their
running
job literally depends on it kind of thing.
yeah, something like that. You
they're
know,
like, hey, $1,000 a month, and oh, by the way, I can either business expense it or tax write it off, one or the other. Like we're in uncharted territory when it comes to tools like that.
And what's interesting is you're seeing even those folks. I'll use Ben Thompson as an example. He talks about using the kind of the high end tier, and he's like, I'm running into periodic like throttling, right? So I mean, they went from there were chunks of what they announced this year that was kind of product stuff, and it always sort of stayed pretty close to the frontier, pretty close to the leading edge, whether it was for video or for chat or for research or for inference or whatever it might have been. That bounced around a little bit this year, more so than in the past. So I don't think their lead or kind of front runner status for model is as far out in front as it was before. There was obviously a lot of things that went on. I mean, you think about this year, and this was the first year that President Trump was actually in office. It felt like 4 years, but like the first couple of days of even his presidency. I mean, Sam Altman and all the tech visionaries were there at the inauguration. About 5 or 6 days into it, they were announcing the Stargate project, the huge data center investment, and so the year. I think for the most part, if you had to summarize OpenAI's year, it was less about technology. It was somewhat about revenue, but it was so much about just these huge kind of forecasts and expectations they were setting about how much compute they were going to need over the next 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, whether it was like a Stargate investment or a SoftBank investment or an Oracle investment or an NVIDIA investment or a Middle East sovereign wealth fund investment. I think the numbers, now are starting to add up to somewhere around, 1.3, $1.4 trillion of compute that they're looking to have built over the next 4, 5, 6 years. And it felt like a weekly or, every 6 weeks, it was like, oh, they're getting another round of funding. They're doing another round of evaluations. They're looking for another data center partner. It was very much the year of OpenAI laying out a vision for expansion that the math didn't necessarily add up, but it kept everybody captivated the whole year of like, how in the world are they going to pull this off? Because either the money wasn't there or the compute capacity wasn't there or the energy wasn't there or the water wasn't there, but they never sort of wavered on like, no, that's where we're going. It's sort of the old like to the moon or bust felt like that was their.
So I have two aspects of all of this. Like what really stood out to me, and by the way, neither of them are maybe technology pieces, but the number one thing that stood out to me this year is, the decoupling of theory versus reality in the announcements, right? Of like, oh yeah, it's I don't know, make up a number. It's $1 trillion investment. Oh, by the way, there's only 10 billion now, and the rest later. Like, so it became this weird. Like, hey, I'm going to promise really, really big stuff. And you started to see all the circular math arguments, and you started to see all the like, hey, you can't commit to something that's like bigger than the size of your entire company and every funding you've ever taken. Like, so there's this whole idea of like, at what point do they get out over their skis of they do seem to be like, hey, we're going to keep this industry going by just over promising and adding bigger and bigger numbers and more zeros behind the dollar signs. Right. Because that announcement is bigger than my competitors' announcements. Right. So there's that aspect of it. And I do want your opinion on it, but I'll give you mine first. Like, the biggest thing I saw with OpenAI this year is like maybe a more clear differentiation of what do they want to be when they grow up? And what I mean by that is like, because it became more from like, hey, ChatGPT to a portfolio. And that portfolio, who is the ultimate end user of all of that? It's almost like, consumer, prosumer. Yes, you'll get some enterprise plans. Like, it's a very Google-like model. It reminds me of like the Google Drive, Google Docs days of like, most startups or most, organizations like, I mean, we still run Google, Docs here at the Cloudcast. Like, it almost becomes going after the individual and team and enterprise, per seat model, but then trying to bake in these trying to account for subscription-based usage all at the same time. And so like, if anything, I'm still slightly confused of who they want to be when they grow up. They just want to seem to be, quote unquote, the biggest, but the biggest to who, and how does that matter, and for what? And like, it just seems to me like, I mean, it's a maybe improper comparison, but I almost compare them to like a WeWork or an Uber of like, we're going to go big as fast as we possibly can, and we're going to make all kinds of promises, and it may or may not blow up.
Yeah. Well, I think, I was thinking about this. We refer back to the Acquired podcast a lot. We're probably driving a whole bunch of subscribers to them. So, we'll get a kickback or something. They had a big episode with Michael Lewis, who writes a bunch of these very interesting books. And I was thinking about it. I think at some point, if he writes the OpenAI book, I suspect the title is going to be something like, they thought the game was winner take all. And because I think, if we think about this, there's people who go, oh, they're trying to become the next Google, like they want to replace Google search or Google advertising or something like that. But if you go back, and again, you have to go back again 10 or 15 years, those companies, whether it was Google or Facebook or any number of companies, like they built a first product, they found product market fit, they were incredibly profitable like very early on, and then beyond that, they started building these ancillary and adjacent businesses that to a certain extent were opportunities to expand their business, grow revenue. But in a lot of cases, they were ways to like, feed the main idea, right? It was like, if it was search, it was like, okay, what are all the ways that what are all the things that you're going to consume information for that you might end up, asking a question about? And, that's how Google got into, mail and maps and, all sorts of other things. And I feel like what happened, the evolution of that, if you were to draw a line through it, is, and you highlighted it, it's like, okay, there was like Google, which was like, okay, they were the first just huge mass aggregation market that did a thing. And then you started having Silicon Valley go, oh, okay, the world is kind of winner take all, right? That's the way they started looking at the market. It wasn't like, well, if you can get to 40% market share, you're dominant. It was like, you're either going to be 90% or you're nothing. And so, then you saw an Uber, and you saw what, the tactics that Uber took, which were basically, doesn't matter what the laws are, doesn't matter what funding looks like, we're going to do everything we can. And then you saw WeWork doing the same thing and getting over leveraged. And I think what's happened with AI, and this isn't specific to OpenAI, but I think because so much of their ethos is driven on, funding deals, and the people that are funding that are like, I'm going to fund you at that level, but you better be winner take all. I think this year to me felt like the year that they had the ethos of winner take all, and I think the all part is the part that they focused on versus the winner part. And what I mean by that is, they were going to be in ads, they were going to be in video, they were going to, they were going to be in sort of search. They were doing an API business, they were doing a chatbot business. They talked about hardware. They hired somebody to start, that came from like DoorDash and was going to help them get into consumer space. They're, doing deals with Walmart and doing deals with Disney about, how to be part of. And you look at all that and you go, okay, yeah, that's a portfolio of 1 million different capabilities and 1 million different products and so forth. But like, none of them are profitable, and they're all, they're not necessarily all, part of the ChatGPT experience, because I don't think they've even figured out what the ChatGPT experience is yet, right? Yeah. Like ChatGPT does not have any network effects to it, other than people being like, hey, do you use ChatGPT? There's no like, hey, I get benefit out of it, and therefore I can accrue benefit down to you guys and people on my team. And, so I feel like you're right in that this was the year they tried to lay out who they were. And I also feel like I don't feel any better about being like, I know where they want to go, other than all. And I think they got the all part right. Well, part of the all part right, although they don't have ads, which is the most glaring piece of it, but they don't have the winner piece of it. And I think that's going to be the really interesting thing to watch 2 years from now, 3 years from now. Because again, 2 years now, 3 years from now are going to be the times when people go, okay, we're all going to stop pretending your math doesn't work. So let's start looking at your math and see how your math really works.
What I'm worried about, and we'll move on to NVIDIA next, but I'll just part with this. What I'm worried about is, the all part they're focusing on is the non-profitable part of AI. Like, will the math ever work?
I mean,
and I'll just kind of leave that there.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's going to be, look, this will obviously be a big topic that we talk about in 2026. I mean, we're not even getting into, they are in the middle of raising yet another round of funding towards $750 billion. I think that's the number.
Yeah.
Right, something like that.
Just make up a stupid large number, and that's what they're
I mean, that's their new valuation. They're looking for like $100 billion at a 7 whatever. I mean, there is big new rounds of funding. There is, will they get into advertising? There is, I mean, all these sort of things are still, we're just closing out the month of December, and we're not even going to touch on these things. So these would be, major things. So yeah, they were a big story. They're going to come out of the year, I think they're saying around 13 billion in revenue, and let's just peg it at, $1.3 trillion in compute commitments. So they're right now they're 100x leveraged. Let's leave 2025 going, yes, that's where they are, which is an interesting place to be.
Agreed.
Next on the list, the company NVIDIA, NVIDIA.
NVIDIA. There you go. Keep
NVIDIA.
going.
I heard that the other. They in 2023, when ChatGPT first started, they were a company worth $400 billion, and now they are worth $5 trillion. I mean, I think if we had to have an award for this year, if we were to lay out awards for the year, I mean, number one award I think would probably go to, Businessman of the Year, which would be whoever runs OpenAI Biz Dev. But I think Hype Man of the Year, I think we would have maybe a two-way tie between Sam and Jensen Huang, because those two NVIDIA on one hand ran an incredibly profitable business. I mean, they ran a business that people would be incredibly jealous to ever run. Supply is all sold out for years on end. You could raise prices if you want to. And at the same time, the business is still entirely based on, I have to hype it every single day in every way possible, because it is entirely based on essentially, do not under any circumstances ever use anything but the latest and greatest of everything. Otherwise, nothing, this whole system doesn't work, which is interesting in and of itself. What were your thoughts on NVIDIA? I mean, NVIDIA was a weird thing because we just kept going up. They made their quarter. They made a lot of money.
No, again, two thoughts on it. One in jest. I actually just thought about this while you were talking about this. Do we need to bring back the Cloudcast drinking game? And for those that don't know, we once upon a time had the Cloudcast drinking game, which was anytime, Docker was mentioned in a keynote, everyone had to drink. Are we at that point with NVIDIA where they're literally everywhere, and like every time Jensen's on stage, we got to take a shot kind of thing? Are we at the point? Are we past the point? Did we maybe miss it? So I want to get your take on that, first of all. And then the second of all, my second theory is, and I actually started this theory at NVIDIA GTC in March, watching the keynote, and Jensen's talking about the next generation of processors, and they're talking about the power and what it's going to consume. And I don't remember the exact numbers, through, I think it was 2027, 2028. But basically, the roadmap goes in a direction from a power consumption standpoint that it's the physics literally don't work. Coming from a data center and colo kind of background, It's physically impossible to power the racks today that they want to go in. And that got me thinking, is NVIDIA going in the way of they're just building, we're not even in, I used to use the Ferrari versus Ford analogies of economy class versus high class car kind of thing. Yeah. I think we're even beyond that. It's building Formula One cars versus building, Ford economy cars or Chevy economy cars kind of thing. And that isn't a slight on the economy cars. It is who needs that top end supercar and who needs just stuff for the masses.
Right.
And it seems like their roadmap is, we're going to build better and better and faster and more expensive supercars.
Right.
And is that the proper one going forward? That's my only big question. And of course, they've got the ecosystem, and they've got the models, and they've got NIM, and they've got CUDA, and they've got all these other things. but that was my big thing. I was like, I mean, at some point, when does physics and, just laws of power and thermodynamics kick in in all of this?
Yeah.
So that's my two thoughts. So drinking game and Ferraris. Go.
Well, yeah. I mean, I do feel like to the drinking game thing. The drinking game used to be Docker, and you could get pretty drunk just watching keynotes with listening to people sort of fawn over Docker. I feel like last year, if we had implemented the drinking game with NVIDIA, because I mean, Jensen did the tour. I mean, he did every keynote. Congratulations to him. Congratulations to his, leather jacket supplier. All sorts of people we get credit for last year. I feel like this year was NVIDIA was sort of a given. I mean, if you really felt like you needed to talk about them, you brought them on stage. But I do feel like there was there was at least as much kind of under the covers, kind of under the radar, people being like, there's going to be something else, right? And I think that kicked off, and I think, gosh, you forget about this stuff because, again, so many things happen in a year. DeepSeek happened. I mean, DeepSeek happened in February or March, and it was, hey, we can build a model. Somebody can build a model that can create rival the frontier models in some way, shape, or form. And again, it's all benchmarks and math that people don't really understand except for a few. But they said we did it without NVIDIA chips. And for a while, for a week or two, I mean, that felt like, holy crap. Yep. The emperor has no clothes. And I only say that because, again, I keep coming back to, and there's lots of analogies between, NVIDIA and like Cisco back in the .com days. And the analogy that I think people are ultimately trying to make is not around Cisco's valuation, which, they sort of got this big evaluation around the internet, just the way NVIDIA is around generative AI. But it was the world is coming aboard, understanding the internet. Bandwidth and traffic is growing like crazy. And Cisco only sold super, super premium stuff, right? They were selling the Ferraris of everything. And there really weren't any alternatives. And then all of a sudden, there were alternatives, right? Like the world, the technology world reached a point where they went, we see far more value in the expansion of the internet than we do only building it using Ferraris, right? To use your sort of analogy. And I feel like there were some chinks in the armor, whether it was, some of the things that people were doing at the software layer, whether people were doing new ways of clustering. Look, NVIDIA still has a dominant position. CUDA is still dominant. And I do feel like NVIDIA did some things every time people would kind of start to get a thing in their mind of like, hey, maybe we don't need, all the highest end things. Maybe we can, run these chips a little bit longer, depreciate them a little bit longer. They were like, okay, let's squash that. Let's put something out as open source as opposed to, being proprietary. Let's invest in something so that we lock up a certain thing. And so I think they still have, the dominant advantage of massive market valuation that they feel like, they're very active to use, right? They're not going to just sit on their money. They're not just going to sit on, kind of their backlog of stuff. I think they're like, yes, the business model we want to have is selling super premium stuff at large volumes. We know that probably won't last, but until they figure out a way to build a chipset, an inference specific chipset or GPU that can scale at different levels, they're like, we're just going to keep, putting up roadblocks for every DeepSeek that kind of comes along, and which is very, very smart on their end. But I do think, again, I go back to this old trope I have all the time, which is, we've never seen an industry that grew, as big as the internet or as big as mobile or as big as cloud based upon, the only hardware supplier being the premium one. It just, it's never done that in the past. And so, that's got to be the thing that keeps Jensen up at night. And at the same time, it's the thing that the rest of the industry is like, how do we figure out how to break this bottleneck? Because it doesn't work otherwise, Well,
let me add another, and this goes back for our crowd. I mean, this goes back to both the virtualization and container abstraction days. Here's the biggest problem I see in the industry right now. So you've got the TensorFlow chips, you've got the Trainium chips, you've got Samba Nova, you've got Grok with a Q, not Grok with a K. You've got Cerebus Networks, and their solution. Here's the problem with all of them presently: is the models have to be, tuned and trained and compiled. If I go back to the old industry terms for those chips, right? And there is no universal abstraction layer yet. I mean, there is, but there isn't, right? There's just when I say is like, there's not one that's the industry standard.
There's pieces, right? There's PyTorch and there's LLM.
Yes, exactly. But there's no like the equivalent of Kubernetes or virtualization of like, Java, I can abstract this sucker, put it in some kind of wrapper, and I can run it anywhere. And that's the single biggest thing I see at the inference and chip level struggling right now.
Well, we're still at a stage where, I mean, all those abstractions that were important in the past, whether it was a Kubernetes or, a container, a Docker, a Kubernetes, a Java, JVM, or whatever, like none of them, at least for a while, were very fast, but people said, hey, the economics are more important. And right now, fast is still the dominant economics because nobody wants to be behind. Because we haven't. Again, this is the challenge of every part of the market is going 1,000 miles an hour at the exact same time because again, everybody's in a winner take all, and usually our markets shake out where it's like, okay, that part of the market went through its wars, somebody won, and there was a dominant and there was a cheap player. And then because of that, it was like, oh, okay, now the economics work for somebody to build an abstraction layer. And we just, because this game is running in parallel, not in serial like it has in the past, we just haven't, the game hasn't played out the way the old games have yet. And that's, it's kind of nobody's fault. It's just the nature of everybody is playing winner take all. And it's tricky. So
agreed.
NVIDIA is going to be, again, we'll go into 2026. They will be a company to watch. I do think the one thing people are probably looking at the most, because the easy way to look at NVIDIA is go, oh, they're dominant. They've got tons of market share. They've got tons of cash. They're sold out. They've got they're going to have new stuff coming out in 2026 probably. But you are seeing a lot of these sort of circular funding things where it's like they gave money to the company to buy stuff, and then the company gave it right back to them, and that company's not making any money. And I think that's going to be an interesting thing to watch is, of the companies that are public that are NVIDIA customers, how many of them are profitable? Because at some point they can't invent new companies to sell to, and those companies need to keep paying the bills. So.
No, one last comment. And this is a personal request to Jensen from Aaron. Please move GTC not to San Jose. Because I don't know if you've been to the event before, but GTC in San Jose is painful. And it's kind of become the industry go-to event, right? Like, for us, it was, VMworld, and it was KubeCon, and it was reInvent. And like, I think GTC has now become the go-to event. And I don't want to eat a bag lunch in the park, in March. Like, I just don't want to do that. So please, like, it doesn't even have to be Vegas, but just please, at some point, consider moving it out of San Jose.
I mean, San Jose was designed to host events that were, gaming size, gaming GPU size events. Anyway. I hear you, man. I luckily don't have to go to that one, but good luck to your sack lunch. All right. Next I had on my list was the year of Microsoft. And I feel like of all the companies on this list, other than maybe a few, Microsoft probably went through the most, I'll say changes for lack of a better vocabulary. I feel like we went into the year, maybe the middle of last year to the beginning of this year, and we were like, Microsoft has got it together. They, Satya has it together. He got out in front of stuff. He has created viable applications with this stuff, whether it's copilots or other things. He's got this great partnership lined up with OpenAI, and he got out in front of that stuff, and he's got great contracts in place to deal with all that stuff. And you look at the way we end the year, and you're like, they went from having 51% control of OpenAI to now they have 28% of it. They have this weird they have this weird clause in their contract that has something to do with like, well, when AGI is defined, then you stop being the exclusive provider of it. I mean, they went from we are all in on OpenAI and OpenAI is all in on us to they definitely don't. We're definitely not exclusive. We're getting less of their money. We made huge bets on their stuff, and we don't. We've never been the leader in building out data centers, and so now we're having to be the leader in building out data centers, and we're getting less money for it. Like, I feel like there must be a pretty interesting reckoning going on in Microsoft, because the other part is, they went from, you were like, oh, they got their model problem solved because they are tied to OpenAI, and now it's like, you fast forward 2 years and they don't have a frontier model that they have control over that everybody else sort of does, even Amazon, whether theirs is any good or not. I mean, they're in an interesting position, especially from where they were just a year ago.
No, I think they went from it was theirs to lose to unfortunately, in the last 12 months, it almost feels like an AWS primitives like approach. Like they don't necessarily want, like they got burned picking a winner because they were like, oh, we're going all in on OpenAI. And then, the board booted Sam, and then Microsoft got spooked and they started divesting everything. And they're like, hey, we don't want to go all in on everyone. So we're going to do this primitives approach. Well, I don't know that this primitives approach is going to work for AI. And, like we've talked about this, and I know like you and Brandon talked about this on last month's Cloud News of the Month. But I firmly believe like we're too early in the enterprise adoption cycle to embrace primitives. Like we have to give everyone solutions. They have to be prescriptive. And you have to get adoption through that, because it's getting, too hard, too complex, too complicated, too many layers with too many dependencies. And folks can't get to ROI fast enough right now.
Yeah.
And so I think that, the biggest thing Microsoft could do, and AWS, I'm going to lump them together in this analogy, is they need to start being prescriptive, and they need to start picking some winners, picking some key partners, and defining some solutions, and putting a nice little, t-shirt sizes, small, medium, large around it, and start treating some of these solutions like a product. And because at the end of the day, that's what Google's doing. And we're going to talk about Google here in a second, but that's what Google is doing. And I think Google's winning.
Yeah. I think if, I think the thing was, I think Microsoft saw, and again, I don't know. I'm just guessing based on interviews and what they did and actions they took and all sorts of stuff. I think once the ChatGPT / Copilot stuff sort of took off, it was, this is the first chance we have in decades to be the leader in something, right? Like we could be the leader in this thing, and they got themselves unfortunately into a situation in which, their bread and butter, their business, for the most part, is enterprise. It's business, right? And so, there was a part of what they were doing that I think aligned to what you're talking about, which was like, yeah, it's prescriptive. You get, Copilot 365. You get Copilot for development. And you got kind of Copilot everything. Whether it was for spreadsheets or for developer stuff or for tying into your GitHub or for, eventually it'll be Teams. And you're like, okay, that all makes sense. It's just part of the tools that you know and love, or at least you just pay for them. And I think that all made sense. And I think the downside they had was, it was like, okay, in order to get that, I have to be locked into a model that I don't really own, but I feel like at the time they were like, well, I feel pretty confident in it, even though it's been 2 years since the Sam Thanksgiving thing. And at the same time, they were like, well, the other side of this is I have to be funding so much money in hardware, in data centers, in build out, in nuclear power plants for the consumer side, to basically, prop up OpenAI. And again, that turned out to be, very unprofitable sort of business. And so I to a certain extent, I think in their mind, they probably don't think they're very primitive based. And the companies that I end up talking to, customers I end up talking to, are like, we just give Microsoft, X hundred millions of dollars and we just get seats of AI. And I don't know that they love that. I think a lot of them are like, holy shit, I don't really want to be paying $20 or $30 a month per person in my office. This is like the new office tax. And I think the problem of it is, it's like, when it was like $2 a month to get Excel, it was like, okay, that's fine. Even if everybody doesn't use it or they're not super productive with it, like, 10x, 20x that number for, being like, what do people get when they're, they need the equivalent of ChatGPT for doing what? For emails? Like, this is crazy. So, I mean, I think they're stuck between, we'd like to execute a Microsoft centric play, the thing that we know that we're aligned to, but right now we don't have ownership and we don't have, direction on the core thing that it is in the terms of the model, right? And that thing's going to dwindle away more and more. And we still have this enormous burden of the GPU training, inference, building data centers piece that doesn't fit their model. And I think they're going to go through some interesting, the good news for Microsoft is they still have a giant money printer, and you can make a lot of mistakes, and you can brute force your way through a lot of things with just having money. But I think more than anybody, Amazon's in a different position, but I feel like they're in the most conflicted position of like, we sort of have leadership in that we've figured out, like we're making probably the most money because people are just making it a subscription, but we also have the worst financials other than OpenAI because we're so tied to their dependencies and so forth. And so, that's going to be it's going to be very interesting to watch how many times people get a price increase from Microsoft this next year or the next 18 months to make up for, kind of having to deal with the lag of OpenAI.
Agreed.
Plus the other thing is like, they are also going to be the one who is going to be very, very interesting to be in the acquisition market, because you got to be sitting there going like three years from now, assuming somebody, whatever the heck AGI is, right, which nobody knows and nobody can define, whatever. I mean, if somebody says like, hey, we have that, like you lose the OpenAI stuff, like as far as, at least it's represented in the marketplace. So like, they may be a very active acquirer of a frontier model, because they got to look at the people that they compete against to be like, we cannot be naked in the model space. Like we can't be Bedrock. That's not tenable. So,
yep. Agreed.
All right, let's move on. I think we're chewing up lots of time. Year of Google. Google do anything this year?
Well, and so I'll simply say, and we mentioned it on the cloud show in review. Google friggin' killed it. Like, there's no other. I think that's the summary. Like, we don't even have to talk too much about it. Like, they friggin' killed it this year. They came back in the frontier model space. They did really well in the consumer space of like even something as simple as the AI generated summaries in Google search that, one of my first, and I know I've talked about it, is like I used Perplexity way back in the day because I was like, oh, this is friggin' way better than Google search. And like, I love Perplexity. And then I kind of moved on to Anthropic once Anthropic had web search built into their models. And so I was, I've been basically, that was like an early like use case for me. But here it again, the Google AI search overview is so good. I'm like, oh, okay, well, I could just kind of do that again. So like they stopped a little bit of bleeding, right? But of course, then they get the flip side of all the people, all the SEO people freaking out of like, well, there's no clicks and there's no this and there's no that. And it's like, well, the industry's kind of moving on, man. Like like you just kind of got to deal with it. But I mean, from a comeback of the year, they easily get the award.
I think they are the epitome of, kind of what we've been talking about this whole show, which is like so many things happen in a year and so many things can change in a year. I mean, they started the year, it seemed like the models were bad. Everybody was concerned because, the search people were like, hey, there's not going to be search anymore. There's alternative search. There's going to be alternative advertising. And oh my gosh, somebody else has a video product. So, what does that mean for the YouTubes? And you close the year and you're like, models, great. Making money, like are they losing money on this stuff? Nope. Hardware wise, they're like, we have more capacity that we're now renting out our TPUs to other people. Like we're not hoarding them all to ourselves. They've got, internally, apparently they've got all the teams lined up under the right organization at this point. You're just like, man, you guys look like Microsoft circa, end of 2023, 2024. Like it feels like you guys got everything going right. it's going to be very interesting to sort of watch what's, kind of how that shakes out. I think the one challenge they're going to have is, is how much do they, does, I'm trying to think of the right way to frame this. Like, they are a consumer company first and foremost, whether it's YouTube or whether it's Waymo or whether it's search or whether it's advertising. Do they get distracted with the enterprise thing? Because the enterprise is probably sitting there with a whole lot of money now going, okay, Google, we've always known you were good at AI. Let's start doing this stuff. And enterprise doesn't work at scale the way that Google wants to. But like, I don't know that enterprise will be a big distraction to Google, because it feels like everything else they do, can run at scale, and it doesn't. It can be as distracting as it want to, but it's not going to distract their business.
Yeah, agreed.
So,
yep.
All right, let's move on to a few others. I had the Year of China AI. This one was fascinating because it was technology, it was tariffs, it was geopolitical, it was it was sort of everything all wrapped up in one. Some stuff we like talking about, some stuff we don't like talking about. But I mean, you had everything from, it began the year and it was like, oh, the Chinese labs are putting out open source models. And so the discussion was everything about like, oh, well, look at them. They're trying to drive down the price of everything. They're trying to drive profitability out of the US companies. Then it was, DeepSeek has figured out a way to build a model that's cheaper and faster on non-NVIDIA hardware. And you were like, oh man, they have cracked the hardware nut. This is going to be interesting. And then of course you had the blowbacks of people being like, oh shit, they fixed the economics, but I don't trust that model. You had US governments, you had US companies, and a whole bunch of companies being like, oh man, I really want that model, but I don't trust that model. That model probably has a whole bunch of bad stuff inside of it, or surveillance stuff inside of it, or whatever it was. And then you've had the ongoing, kind of back and forth. You're never really sure what's going on between like tariffs on chips. You've got things that are, certain chips that still aren't allowed in the country. You've got, are the Huawei chips any good? Are they smuggling in NVIDIA chips, behind, through other countries and so forth? Like, the China piece has been fascinating as just a juxtapose of being like, oh, the US is trying to play by one set of rules, and sort of at every turn, China's like, nope, we're not playing by those rules. We're playing by a different set of rules. And it's sort of interesting to kind of just watch the two of them, whether there's a right or a wrong or a good or a bad in it, just being like, how is this thing going to play out? So much of it feels like it's more geopolitical than it is purely technical.
Yeah. And I'll add this too. I mean, first of all, I think the whole China AI thing was probably, if I had one story where I'm like most fascinating story, this is it for sure. Like everything you just mentioned, but I'm even going to add another vector to that. Again, in the follow the money aspect we've talked about on this show many times. Think about this for a second. There's a lot of startups out there that came out of nowhere, took a lot of funding, got a huge, valuation, and maybe a dirty little secret is, what models are running under the covers under a lot of those startups? Well, like, how did you go from nothing to, 10 million in ARR in a couple months? Well, a lot of times, like, a lot of these Chinese models are under the covers in a lot of startups. And we've talked to a lot of people in the industry, like, it's become almost like we used to talk about AWS being the way to jumpstart your startup, like, because you didn't have to do a data center and you didn't have to go buy hardware and you didn't have to do all these other things. Like, for me, the biggest thing also that stands out is like the OSS models out of China have become the fastest way to jumpstart a startup.
Yeah.
Right. And a lot of people aren't necessarily asking the questions. And I think this is something in the go fast kinds of things. They're like, I'm waiting for this to happen at somewhere in the industry, is like, what happens when one of these companies, like, to kind of use the analogy, like Roomba recently, right? Like, Roomba is not, I mean, you could kind of almost say like, oh yeah, they used AI, but here's where I'm going with this. Roomba declared bankruptcy and sold themselves to China. Now what happens to all that data? It goes to China. And like, what happens when some of these coding startups like go under, get bought, whatever? Yeah. Like, there's a little bit of follow the money. There's also a little bit of follow your data involved in all of this, right? That I think no one is considering or really thinking about.
Yeah, there's some long game stuff that, again, the folks that are just living in the startup world, month to month, burn rates and stuff aren't thinking about. They're just like, I just got to get to the next month. I just got to get to the next funding round. I just got to get to the next thing. So, and yeah, we're already starting to see companies who are buying the code bases of these failed startups and selling them back to the coding assistant companies, because they're like, oh, okay, failure still has a value that I can monetize and build multiples upon and stuff. So yeah, and that's just code bases. That's not data. Yeah, it'll be. I think the China thing is going to be fascinating. The hardest part of the China thing is, it's like anything coming out of China. You only hear what they sort of want you to hear. You probably got to find some insiders that know better stuff. And so much of it right now is unfortunately tied to the whims of, do we have tariffs? Do we not have tariffs? Do we have an agreement? Do we not have an agreement? And that stuff changes day to day and so on and so forth. So
one additional aspect too, I wanted to bring up, and we're starting to see reports and we're starting to hear, kind of rustlings, if you will, of like, is the China AI market also slightly stifling OSS innovation? And what I mean by that is, how did AI historically grow up? On the academic side of the house, you had a bunch of super, super smart people. They write lots of academic papers. They publish those academic papers. Well, now what you're seeing is, the China model companies are taking all of those papers and kind of the best of everything and baking it into their models. And you're starting to see like, the capitalism side of everyone going, wait a second, that's our, that's our IP. And so you're starting to see the classic, like, what's in the open versus what's closed and what's proprietary and what's an advantage in the market. And so the other thing China AI did is turned up that exposure of like, hey, if I publish this, what happens to it? Because you can almost assume if it's a good step forward in the AI industry and you publish it publicly, it's going to get baked into a Chinese model.
Oh, right. Yeah, no, I mean, we don't even have the year of open source and AI in here, and that could be its own thing. Not leaving it out for any reasons. Just there was just so many things to kind of get through. We're hitting so many of the big pillars. We haven't, there's a whole sort of sub ecosystem of stuff we could be covering, and maybe that's what we'll do in 2026. Who knows? Next I had on my list, and this one will go really fast, the year of Apple and AI. Apple signed a big deal with Google, and eventually Gemini will be part of your Apple phone. Okay, moving on. I don't think,
I literally turned off Apple Intelligence on my phone because it's so freaking useless.
Yeah.
All it is. And by the way, my battery life went up. So Cloudcast tip to everyone out there that has an iPhone, turn off Apple Intelligence. It sucks. Yeah. And your battery will be better.
I mean, honestly, the most interesting Apple AI capability that I'm interested in this year, originally it was like, hey, the new iPods are supposed to have this like live translation thing. I don't have the right phone to do that yet.
And the AirPods. Yeah.
And then Google came out with a capability that's part of Google Translate now and tied to Gemini, in which it works on every single pair of headphones. And so, they've sort of duped Apple even in that space. So 2026 will be interesting for Apple to see where, if AI is a big deal for them or if it just is a thing under the covers and they kind of give up on it.
If and when they ever make Siri even vaguely useful, I will revisit this.
Yeah, and it's probably going to be dependent on the next Apple CEO, whoever takes over from Tim Cook. So
true.
Next thing I had on my list, and we are starting to run long in the tooth, probably very long in the tooth for our listeners. I had Year of Coding Agents, and I almost feel like we covered this throughout the year. I don't know. I'll do this as a summary. Coding agents have proven to be one of the areas that is growing a lot. People are paying for it. I don't know whether the companies are necessarily making money on it, if they're profitable, but there is distinct revenue. It is one of 2 or 3 use cases in AI that people are distinctly paying for. It was a very, very interesting, year, whether it was Anthropic or Cursor or Windsurf or,
lovable, and there's 8 million of them, right?
Acquihires and
Yeah.
copilots and CLIs came. Should I do it as a CLI? Should I do it as an IDE? It was a fascinating its own place, and I think we covered it pretty well throughout the year. I don't know that we need to go over more stuff this year. It'll be interesting to watch next year because it does feel like a place that probably needs a bunch of consolidation. Even though developers are always all over the place about what they like, but it feels like an area that there's a lot of really feels like positive progress is happening. Like developers seem to sort of love this stuff as long as you don't talk about it replacing their job, right? As long as it's like, oh, it augments my job, cool. It's very good stuff. I've got Year of Data Centers. I think that this is a thing that we need to, that we have barely even scratched the surface. I think we need to sort of table this one for 2026. Because I think it's something we should just make a regular segment of the show going forward, because this is going to be a big deal. Whether it's where does water come from, where does electricity come from, where does space come from, who's funding them, how fast do they go up? Let's just sort of table that one. Let's hit on these last two real quick. Highlights and lowlights for the year. Anything if you were trying to explain to somebody like, hey, what were a couple of highlights, a couple of lowlights? What might those things be that maybe we didn't touch on yet?
Yeah, I'm going to start off with the biggest thing that kind of hit me this year was the layoffs in our industry, just in general, and some of them being blamed on AI. And let's be honest, some of that was just a smokescreen cover for late stage capitalism and the new idea of like, we're just going to lay people off because the quarterly numbers need to look good. So like, I kind of like, it's interesting. I call out layoffs, but I also call BS on layoffs kind of all at the same time. So there's that. So that's like one thing I didn't like. Another thing I didn't like is this trend especially in the AI startup space of not even Acquihire. It's like, buy out the founders and screw everybody else. Yeah. That trend I like really didn't like as somebody who has done startups and is doing a startup. I'm like, oh man, that's not cool. You know what I mean? Like
we used to live in a world that had rules and norms. This is heathens.
This is my, grumpy old guy yells at cloud. I'm like, don't do that.
Well, don't worry.
Anyway.
No matter what startup you go to, you're not going to make any money out of it. So you're not there early enough.
So, I mean, that's my biggest thought on don't get me wrong, like the highlights, I think we kind of talked about in all the stuff above, but I think we need to highlight some of the lowlights. And so that's why I was kind of focusing on the lowlights. What's your thoughts?
Yeah. No, I don't have any more lowlights. I don't really want to highlight anything else. I'm always fascinated at the funding because it's one thing for VCs to make stupid funding and to chase each other's money and to want to be part of something. I'm a little surprised at how much like institutional investors are funding into this stuff. But again, I think because those guys are a little more like, hey, do the spreadsheets make sense? Do they add up? The funding numbers still just blow me away. And again, like, I hate to be grumpy old man that always, goes back to 2001 or 2008 or whatever. It's just like the numbers are the numbers, folks. Like, the history doesn't rhyme, but it tends to repeat itself. It's interesting time for funding, and I'll just sort of leave it at that.
Yep.
Hey, let me throw one last thing at you. I'll have to find out when we did it. I don't remember. It was maybe 2014 or 15. We did something called the Cloud Draft. We had like 4 or 5 people on the show, and we did it just like people do a fantasy football draft or any sort of draft. Would you be up for doing we can save this to 2026. I feel like we should do an AI draft at this point because there are a few obviously big name companies that you might want to draft. A lot of them we talked about today. But I feel like it would be an interesting show to do to start to suss out some of the secondary players that might be sort of interesting and that you might want to buy and hold for many years to come. Or maybe we'll have a short sell version of the draft as well. But I feel like we're now at the stage we should do this.
I like this, and I'm going to add a flavor to it too. So for all of our international folks out there, fantasy football, American football, like you do a draft, but then also like, here's what I think we need to do is because we just kind of did it as like take anybody. Yeah. We need to do it like positions. So like the quarterback can be the hyperscalers, right? Because there's only going to be so many. And then you're going to need a running back, and the running back can be like, I don't know, a NeoCloud or like a Colo or whatever.
Yeah,
and then you're going to need your wide receivers, and that's a coding agent. Like, I think what we need to do is like assign some positions to this as well.
Yeah. And
you need a team. You need a team.
Yeah, and I think we also need something for the winner and something for the loser, right? We need something that maybe one of us will have to run the Krispy Kreme run again as a loss.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, as somebody who, I can't do gluten anymore. Like I might literally put myself in the hospital. So that might be proper incentive. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, listen, we are rolling up on almost an hour. We're just short of an hour. So I think, you and I don't need to talk anymore. We have covered a million things so far this year. This stuff, we covered a lot today. Let's wrap it up. It's been an interesting year. It's been an interesting year in AI. I don't think it's going to get any less interesting next year. We may, some answers may come out of things. I don't think we'll necessarily have as many companies as we will next year. I think some stuff will shake out. But thank everybody for listening. Thanks for telling a friend. I know last week's show did really, really well. I suspect if people even listen to half of this show, to tell a friend if you like the stuff we're doing. I suspect we will do a decent amount of AI stuff in 2026. But any last thoughts on the AI stuff before we wrap up?
No, I was simply, I'm going to add to that. And, for those that are still listening, first, thanks for powering through. But yeah, this is kind of, for the diehard listeners that are out there. We'd love your feedback on length of the shows. Like we've been kind of considering like, hey, do we start doing more longer form shows and like us together kind of things, or, versus the interviews, and the interviews tend to be shorter. And like, we'd love we're going to be playing with the format of shows in 2026, and kind of, we've already listed out like 3 or 4 examples, but like, we'd love your thoughts on like, what do you want to hear more of in 2026?
Yeah. Show at thecloudcast.net if you want to shoot us an email, or hit us up on one of the social media sites or something. So, all right, folks, with that, we're going to wrap it up. Thanks to Aaron for putting up with me, and thanks to all of you for listening, telling a friend, and helping us grow the community. So with that, we'll wrap it up, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.